Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology to learn about wireless risks and safer technology solutions. I am so delighted to have with me two special guests from California. The first one is Sydney Cox, and those of you who joined us earlier this month, you'll know that she was my co-host. So Sydney, thank you, and thank you for coming back to shed your light and to learn along with us. And Brenda Martinez will be our co-host tonight.
Hello,
Brenda,
everyone.
can you take a few minutes and tell us how you came to learn about wireless radiation and what you're up to these days?
Wow. Okay. So first of all, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, the great honor of being here with you and just giving you a big, big clap on all the work that you do. It's just amazing. And so being part of this and seeing how things get done, it's a great, great honor. So thank you so much for inviting me. And so, well, my name is Brenda Martinez. Some of you may know me, some of you don't, in East LA. And I came about this. I mean, I was always cautious about cell phones. I didn't have my kids have cell phones and stuff like that. But in 2017, we started running a community garden in my neighborhood in East LA. And in 2019, we were notified that after 2 long years of work, everything was going to be destroyed because the property owners had gotten paid and leased the property to Verizon so they can build a cell tower and remove everything. So we organized with the neighbors. We started learning more about it through many different groups. And we came across wonderful people like Scott McCullough and so we learned, we got involved. I translated information for my community so they could learn about this in Spanish. And so that's how it all started, trying to save a little garden. We realized that this was a really big issue, that legislation has to be changed, that a lot of people were not really in informed or even interested. But a lot of people didn't know how old these legislations were, how the regulations in the FCC had not been renewed since 1996. It was just baffling, all this information. So I had to make all that available for my community. And so I got involved in many different groups, and I originally study art. So nothing to do with this, but came in handy. And then I was a parent advocate for special education for a long time. Worked with UCLA in research, so I knew a lot of the the research that was out there that was being ignored by the FCC. So, I thought it was really important to let people know about all these things that are not usually in your regular media. So that's how I became so involved in this.
Well, we are so grateful for everything that you do, Brenda. There have been a number of inroads that have happened with the courts, with the legislation, and what we're thinking about with our schools. And so we'll go through a presentation for about an hour and a half tonight, and then at the end we'll do questions and answers. So our full program tonight is 2 hours long. And we invite people to use the chat, but use it conservatively because we don't want to be distracting from what's happening during the presentation. But if you have something to share, pop it in. If you want to connect with somebody else who's in the participant list, by all means, go ahead and exchange information. And then at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A, and Brenda will be monitoring the chat so she'll know what questions are being answered. And we look forward to sharing this information. The program is being recorded. And so tomorrow I will render the video and get that ready to send out. And I'll also send out my slides, which if anything that we've figured out over the last, Brenda's been involved for 5 or 6 years. I've been involved for about 10 years. And if anything we've learned can help you come up to speed much more quickly, by all means, just dive into those slides and look carefully at information that really piques your interest. Our hope with this particular presentation is to get parents educated, to get grandparents educated, to get community members educated. And then once you've got a good core group in your community, Then we go off and we try to speak to the schools. And Brenda has some information she'll share with us later about an initiative that she's doing with Los Angeles Unified School District. So with that, I will let Brenda take over with monitoring who's trying to get in on our Zoom. And I will go ahead and share my slides here. And I want to say, as I get to launch my slides here, that the first 19 or 20 slides are ones that we're going to cover tonight. At the back of my slides, I have additional ones that I usually cover in my general education webinars. So we invite you to pound around in the rest of the slides when you get my packet tomorrow. And if anything in there you can use, by all means, go ahead. And in our closing slide for tonight, we will leave you with contact information for Sydney, Brenda, and myself, as well as the organization websites that we lead. Okay, so let's go into show mode here. All right, that should come up just momentarily. I think our computers are tired at this point in the day too. Sydney, can you give me a nod if you can see my slide? Okay, good. All right. So this MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing at Northeastern University. And, you know, Sydney's a teacher, Brenda's an artist, and I'm a communications major and a tech writer. None of us ever imagined this is where we'd be spending our time today, but there's no cavalry coming. So if we don't share the information and help to activate our communities, who will, right? And in the meantime, our collective children especially are getting harmed by this radiation. So I'll share with you a little bit about how I got involved in this. And then we'll go through the science and we'll talk a little bit about legislation and we'll talk about what's going on in the courts. And then we're really going to talk about what we can do for our schools. We have terrific resources to share with you today. So back when my two daughters were in our public school system, the wireless industry was pushing through their 21st century classroom campaign, which sounded so cool, right? Who wouldn't want all this new technology? Because we were being told it's really going to help our kids, get them ready for the great big world out there. But then, so I spent 8 years doing fundraising in my schools when I led our local education foundation. We got iPads, we got Chromebooks, we got smart boards, we got wireless infrastructure in our schools, and all these other cool new gadgets that we thought we were supposed to have. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer was reading a book called Zapped, like you stuck your finger in a socket, Zapped, by Anne Louise Gittleman. And Wendy was telling us that it looks like there could be biological harm from wireless. And, you know, it was book group and that's not what we were reading that night. So I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, something crossed my desk from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Now, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that most doctors have never been trained to treat, like the environmental illnesses, like all the toxins in our food source from glyphosate, like chemical exposures from the PFAS. So these are the doctors who know about environmental issues, and they put out a statement in 2012 to school superintendents saying, please don't let wireless into the schools. Stay with wired connections for your technology needs. And I'm thinking, wow, maybe there's something to this. And having spent 8 years bringing all this wireless into our schools, I thought, oh, I better take a look at this. So I'm a technical and professional writer by trade. So I just thought, is there any science to this? And I started looking, and folks, I was shocked. You don't even have to scratch the surface very far to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed published studies showing extensive biological harm. So that's where my journey began. And I started raising my hand with my schools to say, folks, I think we got a problem here. And I got back crickets. Now, granted, when I fell down the rabbit hole here, it was in the summer, and summertime can be the busiest season for school administrators because they've got to close out one fiscal year, they've got to get the next fiscal budget done and approved and on its way. They need to get all their staffing, hiring needs done. They need to do their professional development training. They got to get all the supplies, all the maintenance, everything done in the summers, right? So I got back crickets. But I kept finding information like the French National Library took wireless out in 2008 because of the health risks. There were pockets of schools in Italy and Israel and Belgium and elsewhere that were already removing wireless from the schools. So I started sharing information with my school leaders, with our school committee, with our administrators. And our school committee leader, Lori Tosti, was our chairwoman at the time. She started doing the deep dive, and Lori has a great mind. She's an attorney. She raised 4 children, and she went back for additional training to teach yoga. She volunteered with the hospice program at the hospital. She volunteered at the women's prison. So Lori is the right kind of person to have an open mind. And she and I started sharing information back and forth. And this was not an easy conversation because remember, the industry had been pushing in this 21st century classroom. They had been giving incentives from the state level on down to get all this technology in the schools. And it's kind of a brilliant marketing strategy because they know that if you can get a one-to-one device in the hands of every child, once you have a child as a consumer, you often get to keep them for life. So good on them from a marketing strategy, but as we'll see momentarily, this was never biologically safety tested, and this is especially harmful to children. So it was not an easy conversation in my schools. There were well-respected people in our community, like a veterinarian, like a physicist, technologist, who would get up to the podium at school committee meetings and say, well, our kids deserve to have the best that we can provide to them, because they hadn't done their deep dive and they hadn't looked at the peer-reviewed science. When you first start looking, you see all this disinformation from industry. So we're hoping that we will allow you to shorten that search and be able to use my slides to get in there and look at the real peer-reviewed non-industry funded science. So long story short, we became the first public school district in the nation to even have one of these little signs hanging in our classroom. And we say best practices for mobile devices, turn off the devices when not in use. Otherwise, even when we're not using them, they're sitting there pulsing radiation. Turn on the Wi-Fi in the routers and the access points only when you need it. You can put a switch on the wall that would allow you to turn the Wi-Fi on, and then with a timer, so it goes off automatically after 5 minutes or 10 or 20. So we can't continue to radiate the kids, especially when we're not even using this equipment. And always place the mobile device on a solid surface, not on your body. And we're going to walk you through the legal fine print warning on that one today. So we became the first in the nation to do that, but it was just a sign. Our schools were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I had the privilege of working alongside our state senator, Karen Spilka, who's now our Senate president in Massachusetts. And I went to her local office hours and I showed her the science. I showed her Ashland's little sign. And I had by then invested in a radio frequency detection meter, and we're going to teach you more about that today too. And when I showed her the exposure from her cell phone and her district director's laptop, both devices went right off the charts into the red zone with radiation. And they're both looking at me like deer in the headlights going, really? And I said, yes. And nobody knows that this is a toxin. It's an environmental pollutant. And so Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office, and together we crafted a very simple bill that would bring the right minds together at the state level to form a commission. And I learned that a commission is how a lot of legislatures work. You bring together the right people, you study an issue, you decide what you're going to do, and you do it, and then it goes away. So we've had bills in Massachusetts for 10 years now. Deb Hodgson is a citizen up in New Hampshire, a retired accountant, and her health was crashing. And she was going to go off of Coumadin and had heard somewhere along the line that wireless radiation can affect the blood. So if she's going off Coumadin, she didn't want anything funny going on with her blood from the wireless. So she decided to get rid of the wireless in her home and just connect back through cables and Ethernet adapters to all of their technology. And her kids and her husband are giving her a hard time, like, oh, mom's crazy, right? But Deb, because her health was on the line, she hardwired the house, turned off all the radio frequency antennas and all the devices in the router and everything. And you know what convinced her family that, gee, maybe mom's not really crazy? They had given her a plant that sat in the kitchen doing nothing for months. She turns off the Wi-Fi in the house and that plant shoots up like 15 inches in just 2 months. So it was like a little science experiment. And that's what got her family on board with this. Now her kids are grown and have children of their own, and they've all hardwired their own homes. So Deb had come to a screening of Generation Zapped at a charter school here in Massachusetts that I was brought in to co-host, and we'll teach you more about Generation Zapped today too. And then she asked me to come up and host a screening at her library in New Hampshire, and she invited her state legislators. They had conflicts that night and couldn't come. A little further down the road, she gets a knock at the door, and it's her state representative, Patrick Abrami, and he was asking to be reelected. Well, Pat Abrami was an engineer, and he listened to Deb, and then he went and did his own research, because our engineers have only been taught you have to have heat from a device before there can be any harm. So Representative Patrick Abrami starts doing his investigation into the science, and he has this major wow moment, like, wow, what are we doing with this technology? So Deb and Rep. Abrami hop in his car. They drive down from New Hampshire to my home in Massachusetts, and we sit at my kitchen table for an afternoon, and we help him to connect the dots on this issue. And he writes this incredible bill with 8 critical questions that demand answers. And we're going to teach you about that today too. So long story short, we got a bill passed in New Hampshire in 7 months' time to investigate the health and environmental impact of 5G. And when they got in there, they realized it's not just 5G, that's just the newest thing. It's all wireless emissions. So we're going to teach you about that bill and the outcomes from that. So we have legislation all across the country. And somewhere along the line, back in 2016, somebody in Europe found my work with my schools and with my legislature. And they found first Dr. Deborah Davis. Now, Dr. Deborah Davis heads up and founded the Environmental Health Trust, which is a nonprofit think tank and arguably the world's greatest database on wireless radiation and this whole issue. So these folks in Europe contacted Dr. Davis because they had figured out that you can't fix this issue until people know about it. And so they wanted to build online training to teach people what wireless radiation really is and how to mitigate. So they reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis, and she, by the way, is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She was part of the team that did that report and won the Nobel Prize. So she is one of our nation's leading experts and leading scientists. So they wanted permission to use reference to her database. And she said, absolutely. And you might want to contact this woman, Cece Doucette in Massachusetts, who seems to be making some inroads. So I met this team in Europe, And we all had this little miraculous period for 3 or 6 months where we were all in between contracts. So we had volunteer time to give and we hit it hard. And we came up with an online course that can be completed in about an hour. And it takes us through all of the issues surrounding wireless, as well as excessive screen time and digital addiction. And we can literally train an entire town, a community, a workforce, a school in an hour online. And so we are just about to relaunch this course. Dr. Mikko Ahonen is one of the world's leading scientists on this out of Finland. And he and I have been working on revamping our course. We used to be called wireless education, but we really want to take the focus off of wireless and put it on safe technology. So we are rebranding as Safer Tech Education. And if somebody wants their school or is part of a school that wants to do this, please reach out. We'll give you bulk discounts. We'll work on sliding scale. We will make this happen. We still have overhead costs that we need to pay, but we will make it happen so that we can get the training in your community. And if you think you're at that point right now, reach out, because we would like to run a pilot with a school or two, and we can cut a really good deal for you on that right now. So I am a co-founder and the education services director for this international nonprofit. And then when we were working on these bills, Dr. Deborah Davis of the Environmental Health Trust brought a panel of world-leading experts to our state house to ask for right-to-know legislation. So we had Dr. Deborah Davis, a world-leading scientist. She brought with her Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And I'm sitting at our state house going, wow, we have a captain of industry here. And his message is that we can absolutely do better if we give industry a nudge. So we know we can fix this. We already know there are existing technologies that work, but they have got a business model that is making revenue streams hand over fist. So it's going to take the public really speaking up to push the needle that way. We also had Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who's a child psychologist, and she lectures all over the world. And she was telling us that children should be outside playing in nature, under the rhododendron, going into deeper and deeper levels of imaginative play, because that, connecting with nature, movement, connecting with their peers, connecting with adults who are trustworthy, that is how a child's brain properly develops, not in the shallows of a screen. So she has a really great book called The Big Disconnect, and she takes us through every stage of childhood development. She's a very engaging speaker too, and you can link to all these lectures from that symposium at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So lots of amazing speakers that we have had the privilege of presenting with over the years. And from that day, back in, it must have been 2015 or 2016 when I was down at the State House. For the first 2 years, I was completely on my own on this journey. So it was so gratifying to come to the State House and be in a standing room only event with people from all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who knew that wireless tech was not safe. So that's how we began. We started connecting and we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which I lead. And you are more than welcome to go out to our website. You'll find the science. You'll see what we're doing at the state level. You'll see what we're doing at the local level. We have a news page because people don't hear about this in mainstream news. But there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes with the local media, with cable stations. So when somebody says, yeah, well, we've all been conditioned to think, as soon as you open your mouth and say, I think there's something up with wireless, we're all conditioned to go, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, because that's what industry has provided to us with their disinformation campaigns. So we have resources for you at Massachusetts for Safe Technology that can help to counter a lot of that. So please use these resources. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference. Now, this was a consortium of people from all different industries, from healthcare, from construction, urban planning and design, hospitals, the leads and the other green certifying organizations were all there, along with our federal agencies. So this was a really wonderful opportunity to have a panel on technology safety. And the reason why I like to share this link is that we were all limited to about 8 minutes in our talks. So I gave the opening remarks. Frank Clegg flew in on his own time and dime from, Canada, the former president of Microsoft Canada. We had Theodora Scarrato, who is the executive director at Dr. Davis's Environmental Health Trust. And we also had Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, who's one of the world's leading scientists on this, who teaches us the mechanisms of harm, which we're going to go through today. And then we also had Peter Sullivan. And I found Peter Sullivan's work through some investigation I was doing, and I came across a lecture that he had given online. Now, Peter has a really interesting backstory. He used to be a fighter pilot when he was a younger man for our government, kind of like Top Gun. So he was highly exposed to the Earth's natural high levels of electromagnetic radiation way up high in his plane, plus the radar that was mounted on his plane, plus all the instrumentation inside the plane that's, communicating back to land. All of this natural and man-made radiation made Peter get very sick over the years. And then, once he left the military, he was an engineer and he went to work in Silicon Valley. So it was like his friends who invented cell phones and stuff. So Peter's health eventually started crashing. He lost, wild amounts of weight. His teeth started getting very brittle. And when his two sons each came up through the preschool years, they were both diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So I'm listening to this talk with Peter, and he said that he did a lot of things that families with loved ones on the spectrum will do. They will figure out that you can't keep eating chemically grown foods because it's a toxic load on your body. So he switched to a clean organic diet. He learned that heavy metals from the environment, from these foods, even from tattoos, lodge inside our brains and organs and can wreak all sorts of havoc. So he did the heavy metal detox on himself and his sons. And then he says, today, the first thing I advise people, especially families with members on the spectrum, is to do the digital detox for at least 12 hours a night, create a sleep sanctuary, and just, again, we don't want to take anybody's technology away, but we want to teach you to use it safely. So wherever you can, when you're not on the go, don't use wireless. Choose hardwired technology, which just means plugging in with an Ethernet cable from the back of your router. Run those cables to wherever you need your technology, and then buy the little adapters to go to your devices. And we'll talk more about that today too. So Peter's two sons on the autism spectrum as preschoolers are now grown men, and neither of them is on the autism spectrum anymore. And I was like, what? I didn't even know that was an option. But Peter taught us that there's something called de novo mutations, which means it didn't come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. So you begin to peel back these environmental exposures and mitigate. And lo and behold, we have story after story after story of families who are experiencing great improvements, if not full recovery. And we don't want to overpromise anything because each one of us biologically are very different, and we have different genetics and we have different environmental experiences and exposures. But I will tell you, we hear people time and again come back to us and say, wow, I did what you suggested. I created that sleep sanctuary and my headaches went away, my nosebleeds, my anxiety and depression calmed way down. And when we look at the science, you'll see very clearly why that makes sense. So for very quick credibility, please use these lectures from the National Institutes of Health. They're about 8 minutes each and a very good and quick way to learn about this issue and share with others. So one of the big pitfalls we had when I fell down the rabbit hole is we could tell there were so many people getting sick, but we had no medical training. And so in 2019, Dr. Lynn Patrick formed the first international EMF medical conference that was hosted here in the United States. And then in 2021, Elizabeth Kelly, who has been working on this issue for decades, she's a master's in public health. She has worked with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and has made serious inroads over the years. She put together this EMF medical conference that took 2 years to put together. And she got it accredited for both doctors and nurses. There were 24.5 CMEs and CEs for the nurses. And those credits expired last summer. But Libby Kelly has taken the entire conference online, and now it is available at no charge for you, for your healthcare practitioners, for your first responders in your town. Everybody needs to know about this because so many people are not only sick, but they are getting misdiagnosed. So please take advantage of these resources. And that's my story. That's how I got involved in this. And so long as I can keep going, and some days I will tell you I want to stay in bed and curl up in a ball and never come out again. But then I look at all these encouraging inroads that we're going to share with you tonight, and I say, they finally got ahead of big tobacco. They finally got ahead of asbestos. They finally are getting ahead of PFAS. Let's see what we can keep doing to get ahead of technology safety. So how did my schools become the first in the nation to even have our little sign? I think it was when they read the legal fine print. So for anybody with us today, I invite you, if you have an iPhone, to take it out and go into settings. And it's not just in the iPhone what I'm going to show you, but I know exactly where it is. For any other device, if you look it up in your manuals or on your device, look in the legal section for RF exposure. That's radio frequency radiation. And I'll just tell you a little bit about the acronyms in this space that we're in. We are talking about man-made radiation. It pulses at us through these electromagnetic fields, or EMFs. So it's radio frequency radiation that pulses electromagnetic fields. There's something called the electromagnetic spectrum, and it talks about how big the different wavelengths are and how fast they come at us. And the focus that we are on tonight is on the man-made radio frequency radiation that's in the microwave spectrum. So yes, all of our devices operate off of microwave radiation. Some will say, oh, but it's low level, it's non-ionizing, it's non-thermal. That doesn't matter. It's the nature of these pulsations that is biologically disruptive. So non-thermal means it doesn't cause heat, but you don't have to have heat to have harm, as it turns out in the science that we're going to share with you. So for those of you who have pulled out your iPhones, you go into settings, and from there, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. So settings, general, and then go all the way down to the bottom and hit legal and regulatory. So settings, general, legal, and regulatory. And on the next screen, a little ways from the top, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure, radio frequency radiation that they politely call energy, because it is indeed a man-made energy light form. And in there, it gives us some really important information. One, they tested this device at a distance from the body. So if you're holding it while it's radiating, if you're tucking it in your bra, if you're sticking it in your suit pocket or your shirt pocket or your yoga waistband or your back pocket, You are exceeding our government limits for public radiation exposure. By the way, those limits were never biologically safety tested. And as we'll share with you in a few minutes, the FCC has now been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence of harm entered into the public record. So the next thing they tell us in there, you know, hey, we're good guys. If you want to reduce your exposure, once you know, basically don't touch something that's radiating. They say to use a hands-free option. And they talk about using the speakerphone or use a speakerphone or use the headset that might have come with your device. And I'm going to pause my screen share for a minute to give a bit of encouragement. So everything we've broken, we know how to fix. So with the headsets, one of the properties of radio frequency microwave radiation, or EMFs, is that it magnifies or amplifies around metal. So if you have a traditional headset and you plug it into your radiating device, the radiation is going to go up the wire and right to your brain, go, woohoo, party on, here we go, right up the metal wire. So those regular headsets are not advised, certainly not those earbuds, because when you put an earbud in your head, you're putting a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain that is communicating radiation back and forth to whatever device you're paired with. So those are a really bad idea. And now we also have reports coming out that they are causing hearing loss and bacterial infections because the ear can't breathe when you've got it plugged up with those. And now we're seeing hearing loss and other damages to the ear. So those earbuds are a really, really dangerous idea. So what do? Well, when we're not on the go, we use hardwired technology. If we are on the go and we need to use something that's radiating, turn off every antenna in that device except for the one antenna you need for the shortest amount of time as you can get away with. So just know that this one device has multiple antennas in it. We've never been taught that all these different services they keep coming up with come with a separate antenna. So this one device will have a cellular and a data antenna, a Bluetooth antenna, a Wi-Fi antenna, a locator, a hotspot, and by now most people have been talked into upgrading to a 5G phone. If you haven't, don't. And the 5G comes with an array of multiple antennas in here. So they just keep adding and adding and adding. Turn off every single one in your settings. And if you're using something like an iPhone and you go and you hit airplane mode, that's the first step. But then look at the other antennas. Look at Bluetooth, look at Wi-Fi. And if they say connected or not connected, that's not good enough. Remember, this is two-way microwave radiation. So if it still says connected or not connected, it's still pulsing from your device. Connected means it made a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router. Not connected means it didn't, but it's still pulsing to see if it can find one. So not connected is not good enough. Hit that and then turn it off. Make sure Bluetooth is off, make sure Wi-Fi is off, and make sure your airplane mode is on. So only use the one antenna you need for the shortest amount of time. When you put your cell phone in airplane mode with all those antennas off, your calls will go into your voicemail, and people who have to work with a mobile device will set alarm, because everything that's on your device is there for you to enjoy. Your clock, your camera, your alarms, any apps that you've downloaded are on there, and you don't need to constantly send radiation back and forth. If you want to sync up with whatever, then just set your device as far away from you as you can, turn it on for a minute, let it upload, download, and then go right back into airplane mode. But if you do have to use a headset, look for something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It still plugs into your device. You might need to get a little adapter for that. And then it's got the wire, which is nice and long, to put your radiating device as far away from you as you can, because distance is your friend. And then it's got controls for muting and volume. And then it's got these two little ferrite beads that break the radiation. And then the acoustics go up through a hollow tube. So this is called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And notice there's no metal at the tips of these. It's just rubber. And so you hook it on your ear and think of it as like a doctor's stethoscope, right? You get great acoustics, but you don't get the radiation right up to your brain. So we can't kid ourselves. There's no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So the goal is to reduce as much as we can. Now, the Centers for Disease Control has a page out on their website on ionizing radiation, which is like X-rays and gamma rays and the sun. We would never leave ourselves exposed to any of that for any length of time. And we should never leave ourselves exposed to non-ionizing radiation either. But as you'll see in a few minutes, there's a lot of captured agencies that are not giving the public the information they need. But the CDC says when you're dealing with radiation, three-pronged approach. One, spend as little time radiating yourself as you can. Two, create as much distance as you can. And three, if you can't get away from it, you should shield yourself. And we'll talk about shielding this non-ionizing radiation or wireless radiation in a little bit. But while I'm taking a break from my slides, I want to give you a demonstration because I had the hardest time getting my head around this invisible exposure, right? And if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that we need to be vigilant about the invisible exposures in our environment. So at the EMF medical conference, this is the device that was recommended to doctors. And I know a doctor here on the North Shore in Massachusetts who purchased one of these $400 meters, and she loans it to her patients. She charges them $10, so they'll take it seriously, and says, you've got 2 hours. Go home, do your scavenger hunt, write down what you find from everything that's radiating in your home, and then come back, and we're going to teach you how to work through that. So in the scientific literature, in our homes, in our sleeping areas, indoors, they want us to be at 10 or less on the middle number when I turn this on. That's going to be the maximum spike of exposure, because it's not the average of these exposures that's hurting us. The industry hides behind the average, but that's not where the harm is happening. It's each one of these spikes that are pulsating at us. And some people will say, oh, but you know, the earth has its own electromagnetic field. And of course it does. Every living thing is meant to be connected to that beautiful healing energy of electromagnetic radiation from nature. There's a scientist named Schumann who figured out what that pulse is. And now it's called Schumann's resonance. We resonate with the Earth's electromagnetic field that pulses 7.83 times per second. In scientific terms, that's called 7.83 hertz. So that's what we should be connected to get this healing energy to regulate our own bioelectrical systems. When we started getting so fancy with our man-made energies, we started using technology in the megahertz range, and now we're moving up into the gigahertz range. So megahertz signals were long wavelengths that could get through the windows and the floors and the ceilings to reach our devices to make a connection. All that's left to monetize are these tiny little millimeter waves. And so the industry has gotten licensing for that for 5G and the Internet of Things. Our military has used those little tiny waves for years for crowd control. They can do beamforming and really point at people and it burns the skin. Well, this is what we're doing with 5G. So when we got into digital technology, we started using megahertz, like 2.4, is it megahertz? Or, well, anyways, megahertz means 1 million times a second. We're getting pulsated with microwaves. Gigahertz means 1 billion times per second. We're getting jackhammered with microwaves, and how they can fit 1 billion of anything in a second, I don't know, but they've figured it out. We're meant to be at 7.83 times per second. So it explains a lot with why we have so many systems crashing for children, for adults, for the environment, the birds, the bees, and the trees. And we're going to give you all that science today. But I want to give you a demonstration because seeing for me was believing. Here in my house, after I quit circling my tail and I came up to speed on the science, I finally said, look, girl, you are the mom. It's your job to protect your family. So notice that I've got a nice green glow here. And on this middle number, I am now at 2.8 microwatts per square meter. So basically in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is coming through? I'm at a 2. But I want to show you what happens when I take my cell phone out of airplane mode, which is how I leave it all the time. And I forward my cell phone calls to my landline, and everybody in my world knows to get me on my landline or my computer because I only use this when I'm teaching or in emergencies. So I'm going to go ahead and take my cell phone out of airplane mode. Remember that we were at 2 microwatts per square meter. And all those antennas are coming online. The cellular, the data, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, the locator, the hotspot. This is an iPhone 7, so it doesn't even have the addition of the 5G antennas in it. So we went, whoa, okay, I'm going back into airplane mode. My tell is my pinky finger starts to tingle when my body starts feeling the radiation, and that's what just happened there. And we'll teach you more about the symptoms before. Okay, so I was at 2. In our home, school, sleeping areas, they want us to be at 10 or less in the scientific literature. By turning on my one cell phone, I blew off this meter at 3,180 microwatts per square meter. 3 million, and we want to be at 10 or less, not 10,000, 10 or less. Now multiply that in a classroom where you have wireless access points mounted on the ceiling. You have teachers using instructional devices, smart boards, Apple TVs, minis. You have children with their own cell phones. You have children and teachers with wearables. You have issued Chromebooks, smartboard, or Apple iPads. And this radiation goes out like a pebble in a pond. So we have really got to learn and find the courage. Maybe your school will be the first to really get this right. We have a lot of inroads happening right now, but everybody's waiting for someone else to get there first. Let's find that courage today and protect our schools and our children this school year. And we're going to teach you how to do that. Okay. That's our demonstration. Let me just make Brenda co-host again. And she's doing the Wizard of Oz in the background for us. So Brenda, thank you. Sorry that dropped off on you a moment ago. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my screen share. And in a minute, you will see my slides. So I want to give a lot of encouragement because for everything that we have broken, we know how to fix. So my brain went right to solutions when I figured out, hey, we can measure this invisible exposure. So I went after a grant in my community. The Boston Marathon runs through our town, and every town on the route is offered runner's bibs that the town then takes, and people in the community say, I'll do some fundraising for that. So they do fundraising, and then we get this pot of money that gets redistributed out through community grants. So I submitted an application and I thought, let's get a meter for the schools and let's get a meter for the library so everybody in the community can borrow it and go out and just measure. And once you know what your exposures are, then we can learn how to fix them, right? Sounded pretty straightforward to me. So I submitted my application and it got rejected. Our board of select persons, which is like our city council, they said, gee, we don't really know about this, so come back next time. Well, I came back a second time and they said, gee, this is probably more of a Board of Health issue. So they lobbed it over to the Board of Health. And so I had already been in touch with our health agent here in Ashland, Massachusetts, and he was around back in the 90s when the first cell towers were coming in. And industry literally wined and dined our municipal agents and brought them out to fancy restaurants and said, hey, let's get all lathered up about these cell towers. It's going to be so great. And when somebody raised their hands and said, well, what about the risk factors? What about biological and environmental effects? They said, gee, sorry, the Telecom Act of 1996 says if there's any consideration over health, or actually they said over environmental impact, gee, you can't sue us. So that's how they did it. The industry influenced that Telecom Act of 1996. They put conditions in there in Section 704 that left them untouchable as they put these toxins into our communities. So industry will come in and tell our towns, oh, hey, there's nothing you can do. Well, that's not altogether true. You may have one finger tied, but you've got 9 other fingers. Your hands are not tied. We know attorneys who can help you rewrite your zoning code. And at the back end of my slides, you will find resources for that. We're not going to go through all that tonight, but I do go through that in other webinars. But the resources are there for you to investigate. So I went the second time and submitted my grant application, and it was denied. And by then, my bill had come up for public hearing at the Massachusetts State House to form a commission to investigate this issue. And when I testified in front of the Joint Committee on Public Health here in Massachusetts, I was reading their faces and I could tell from their eyes that not one person at our state level Committee on Public Health even knew that wireless radiation was something to look at. And so we only get 3 minutes to testify. And I thought, wow, that's not going to cut it. You know, I was showing the science, I was showing the measurement, I was showing Ashland's little sign. And then I made it my business to go up to the State House and I met with every office that had a legislator on one of these committees, because at one point we had 20 bills in Massachusetts. And I got in there and I educated and I started every conversation with, can you please help me understand what you might know about the biological effects of today's wireless technology? And to the person, say for one, they said, gee, we never even thought to think about this until you brought it up. The one person who said, I know a little bit about man-made radiation. Why don't you tell me what you came to tell me? Well, he had just graduated from Suffolk Law School, and his father was the physicist that led the team into Chernobyl after it blew. So he grew up knowing about man-made radiation. But we have had these bills in Massachusetts for 10 years that have gone out of committee favorably from time to time, but never enacted. We have very powerful industry influence in Massachusetts. So by the time I was ready to submit my application for the third time, I thought, wow, I need to do in my town what I've been doing at the State House. So I doubled back and I asked for an individual meeting with every member of our select board. And I met with one in my home. Our daughters were raised together and I showed her what was going on. Another one was a retired police officer and he said, Cece, you had me at hello, because a lot of his brethren in the police force wound up getting tumors from the radar, from the radio frequency radiation detectors in the back of the police cruisers that were blasting that radiation through their brains to do traffic control, or they were putting the radar guns on their thighs and thigh cancers were coming up. So I met another one in a local business. I went to another one's house where a second select board member met me, and I just showed them what this is and showed the science. They were still a little hesitant because there was nobody above them advising on what to do. But to their credit, they gave me the $400 to put one radio frequency detection meter on loan in the Ashland Public Library. And we became the first in the nation to do so. And now It's not hard to ask, and other citizens are approaching their library all across the country to say, hey, we know that most libraries are reinventing themselves today. Not everybody comes to the library anymore to borrow a book. So libraries are now creating a library of things. In my daughter's town, she's on the wait list to get a power washer from her library. You can rent board games, you can borrow puzzles, you can borrow electronic equipment. You know, we have disc golf discs, all sorts of fun things, paddle, pickleboard, you know, all that fun stuff. But I got the idea for this because when the energy industry was taking away our incandescent light bulbs, which by the way, were much healthier for us. All these fluorescent and CFL light bulbs throw off a really nasty form of dirty electricity that can make some people sick. Well, when they started promoting those CFL light bulbs, they put into circulation in our libraries a kilowatt meter that came in a little case. They got it barcoded, and you could go borrow that kilowatt meter to, you know, theoretically plug it in and measure a CFL light bulb against your incandescent light bulb, do the math and see how much money you'd save every year. But it can't be all about follow the dollar. We've got to strike that balance with biological and environmental effects and how much money we're going to save. So that's how I got the idea to put a radiation detection meter on loan in our public library. And Pittsfield, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where a cell tower went up on top of a neighborhood, made 17 children and adults so sick that after a very long battle with their town, their Board of Health deemed their homes uninhabitable. And we'll talk about a lawsuit that's going on there. So they have one. Sunderland just got one put in. Hillsdale, New York, where I was brought in to present. The locals worked with their library. They got one put in recently. The one in my library is another $400 meter. It's called the Acoustimeter. Both of them are exceptionally highly calibrated, and they give you very good readings. Today, I might go with the Safe and Sound Pro 2 because it's got a few more features on it. It has a plug in it. So for those who are electrically sensitive, they could just plug it in and leave it on. And as soon as somebody comes in their house who forgot to turn off their radiation devices, they will get an alarm, and then they can say, please turn that off before it makes me sick. So lots of great resources here. And so if you open this conversation with your library and they say, gee, you know, we don't have this in our budget this year, or maybe we could pay $200, but not the full $400, we really encourage you to get the good meter. Some have gone for a cheaper one for like $100. And when we put them side by side with these good meters, they're missing a lot of the signals that are going through the air. So really try and get a good meter if you can. There are some like little sister ones to these two devices for about $200 that do a pretty good job. But if you can, aim for these that are in the $400 range, because it's just a much better data set that you're going to get. So the Environmental Health Trust has a small grant fund, and if your library cannot afford or can only partially afford one of these meters, please have your librarian reach out. It can't be you and I, it needs to be the librarian, and they will help to make sure you guys get one into circulation. So again, we are solutions-based. Let's see what we can do. So that concludes most of my journey. Now let's take a few minutes and really look at the science. Before we do that, I want to encourage you at the community level to work with your local cable stations. Many of us know today that we started out with maybe 50 mainstream media outlets, and they got bought out, and they got bought out, and they got bought out, and they got bought out. And most of mainstream media today is now owned by the same 4 to 6 conglomerations that are also key owners of these companies that are promoting all of this wireless technology and other environmental pollutants. So they control the messaging. So we simply do not get balanced information in mainstream media anymore. But our local cable stations can be one of the last independent bastions for independent reporting. So my WACA TV here in Ashland has been so gracious to me. We've done a number of public service announcements over the years. We've done episodes on other people's talk shows. And they actually came to my house with their professional camera, and we did a 23-minute public service announcement of a walkthrough of my home showing common microwave radiation exposures using this acoustimeter. And then, of course, recommending suggestions for how to mitigate that. And then I was brought out to WCCA TV in Worcester, Massachusetts for a couple of programs when National Grid started rolling out their smart grid program for utility electric meters. And we'll talk about smart meters a little bit too. But ultimately, the station manager there said, Cece, you just need to have your own show. And with my undergraduate degree in communication studies, my master's in technical writing, and I'm the youngest of 10 kids, I kind of popped out of the womb having to have communication as a survival skill. It's kind of my happy place, teaching people how to use technology safely. So I was so grateful to Morrow and his team and my producer, Adam Rice, out there, that every second and fourth Friday, I go out to the studio and I invite guests in from all over the country, all over the world, to come share their experiences, from scientists to medical doctors to legislators to Brenda Martinez and Sydney Cox, who have been our co-hosts this month. We've done half-hour episodes. Sydney and I have done 2 episodes so far. We're up to 40 episodes. Most recently, I interviewed Alan Brennan from Ireland, who's an IT guy, and he talks to us so that we have some information to give to our IT directors at work and in our schools that will quickly make sense to them, because a lot of that goes over my head. So I've got a techie on tap. So use your local cable stations. If you want to bring me in, I have a Zoom account. I would be honored to Zoom in with you and present in your local community. Then you'll have something that's local to share out with everybody that you're trying to open this conversation with. So let us know how we can help. All right, let's talk about the science. First, we're going to look at the long-term effects, and then we're going to look at the short-term effects. So for years, the industry got away with saying there's no mechanism of harm identified, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. Well, today we know scientifically in peer-reviewed, repeated studies, many different mechanisms of harm. Our government at the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences houses the National Toxicology Program, or what's called the NTP. The NTP was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration more than 20 years ago to investigate whether cell phones could be harmful. Now, 20 years ago, 2G and 3G cell phones were the technology of the day. So they started doing the rodent studies. It's unethical to do these studies on humans, although we're now, all of us, part of this giant experiment of uncontrolled radiation. But anyway, they can't stick us in a lab and do that, but they do put rodents, because what happens to these sprayed dolly rats and certain strains of mice is ultimately what happens to the human species as well. So they exposed these rodents to non-thermal, non-ionizing, low-level radio frequency microwave radiation, and it took them 20 years to complete their investigation. And at the end of the day, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading scientists and experts, and they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign. And the industry will grab these good studies and say, well, gee, that's just one study. You need more than one. Well, right on the heels of our major breakthrough finding here, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy concluded another multi-million-dollar study. Our study was $30 million, the biggest study on any toxin that our government has ever done, and they found clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. And that's exactly what the Ramazzini Institute found when they investigated cell towers, or what they call base stations. So back in 2011, the World Health Organization classified this man-made radiation as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. What was missing at that time were the animal studies, and now they are done. And they conclude clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other harms. So we don't need more science. We know this is a toxin. DNA damage. So DNA is our roadmap to grow a proper anything, from a human to a plant, a pollinator, a tree, and every other biome out there. And infertility. So when I was doing my investigation, when I got to the infertility studies, this is what got me on my feet. I studied that they have taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating. Remember, most of these devices have multiple antennas. It caused DNA damage. It caused fewer sperm to be viable. Apoptosis, or programmed cell death, as the medical community calls it. It was killing off the sperm, and it was slowing the motility of the sperm. In 4 hours of exposure to a laptop. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. I had just sent my oldest daughter off to college with her MacBook, where is she using it? But right on top of her reproductive organs. My youngest had just gone into high school, and we thought we'd give her a leg up. So for Christmas, we gifted her with her own laptop. And where is she using it? But right on top of her reproductive organs. And since I started reading this science, Kaiser Permanente came out with another really well done study on women's infertility and higher miscarriage rates and such. So we don't need more science, but look at what we also know. Neurotoxicity. Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OB/GYN program at Yale Medical School, and he has done some of these rodent studies where he exposed the pregnant mice to radiation from a cell phone. And when the pups were born, they came out and started bouncing off the walls of the cage, exhibiting this unusual behavior that resembled a child with attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, where they can't focus, they can't concentrate, not a care in the world, right? So we know scientifically that this is biologically harmful to our neurons and our whole central nervous system. Dr. Martha Herbert founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She is a Harvard pediatric neurologist. She's just retired, but she, in her investigation, noted that we get to a tipping point. Our poor bodies and brains can't keep up with this toxic load, and it eventually tips us into what some may experience as ADD, ADHD, or autism. But as we begin to peel that back, we often see important recoveries. Martin Paul, who I mentioned from our conference at the NIH, he started calling the science on Alzheimer's. And it used to be that Alzheimer's would hit people in their 80s or their 90s, and then it started happening in our 70s, our 60s, our 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in some cases in our 20s. So we cannot continue to pulsate the brain with microwave radiation and expect that we're going to have the same outcomes that we used to have. So I mentioned that it's really hard to get this information out to the public. So we're so very grateful when mainstream media or well-known groups report on this. So I first learned about the Environmental Working Group as a mom, and I learned that they come out with pesticide warnings. Every year they do their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list of what produce you can buy conventionally without too much toxic exposure, and which of the, Dirty Dozen you should really be buying organic if you can get it. So I already knew and trusted their work, and then they got funding to put a PhD on the wireless issue, and they have come out with a number of really good fact sheets. This one, relevant to our talk tonight, protecting kids from wireless radiation at home and in schools. And this other one over here is on neurotoxicity. So excellent resources, know your audience, know what they might find to be trustworthy, and start with that. And we have to know that children are not little adults. They are still in formation. Their central nervous system is still under construction. Their DNA is still forming, and their skulls are thinner, and they have a higher water content in their brains. And as Brenda indicated in the interview we did on WCCA TV, we have something called the blood-brain barrier, which is this membrane that protects this very sensitive organ. As our body rids itself of everyday toxins through the bloodstream, it's supposed to just go out and, go out through our urine and our feces and get out of our body. But when we expose ourselves to these constant pulsations of microwave radiation, Dr. Pal Patcher and his team of other scientists did studies that showed when you bombard the brain with microwave radiation, it permeates the blood-brain barrier. And so now you've got holes in your blood-brain barrier, and those toxins, in addition to the radiation, can now get to your brain and cause all sorts of neurological issues. So thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues, they did modeling of how far into the brain this penetrates when you put a cell phone up to your head. So these are the models up here. The heads are turned sideways. The little yellow dot is the ear. When you put that cell phone up to your brain as a fully formed adult, you are pulsating your brain with microwaves about a third of the way through. When you do this to a 10-year-old child, it's penetrating about 2/3 of the way into that child's brain. And on a 5-year-old child, it is permeating almost the entire brain with microwave pulsations. So we can't keep doing this, you guys, and there's no cavalry coming up from above. We've got to learn and find the courage. Brenda and I never set off. Sydney never set off. Ruth from Burlington, Massachusetts never set off to say, hey, I think I'll go spend all my time on radiation. No. But once you know, you can't unknow it. And we are morally bound to protect our collective kids. So we have everything we need to get this done today. And we'll talk about solutions after we finish talking about the science and the public policy and the court stuff. So please know that for 2 decades, the Americans with Disabilities Act have already recognized that electromagnetic sensitivity is a real thing, along with multiple chemical sensitivities. So know that you've got that in your pocket. You can go look at that for the recommended accommodations. And then the good news is that once people learn about this, they find the courage often and go, I didn't want to know it. I didn't want to believe it. I live on my device, but I recognized a lot of these symptoms. And I thought, what can it hurt to try this sleep sanctuary that Cece was talking about? Please mute if you're not actively speaking. And so these are a lot of the short-term symptoms that go away when we remove the microwave radiation exposures. But I will caution you, these exposures are cumulative over time. Some people are lucky enough to have the symptoms go away. Others are permanently injured. So don't wait, folks. Find the courage, keep learning, and take charge of your own technology. When we talk about mechanisms of harm, so we know about the blood-brain barrier, we know about cancers, we know about infertility. What we know about insomnia is this. We are light beings, meaning that our whole system is calibrated to the 24-hour circadian rhythm. In the wee hours of darkness, our body and our brain work together to do cell repair and cleanup. We regulate our sleep. And the way that happens is the brain from the pineal gland releases melatonin. Melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep, and it also helps to escort the toxins out of the body. So what happens when we leave ourselves exposed to this invisible light energy form? The brain cannot differentiate between natural daylight and this light energy form. So the brain's over there going, do, when's it going to get dark? I want to release that melatonin. And over time, we see this domino effect. And you'll notice that a lot of kids on the spectrum or with ADD, ADHD, they might be melatonin deficient. Women with breast cancers, we now see men getting breast cancers from storing their devices. A lot of people are getting melatonin deficient, and this can be one of the critical factors. So create a sleep sanctuary. Use a hardwired landline phone or put your cell phone as far away as you can if you need it for emergencies, and only leave on the one antenna that's going to ring your phone, right? Don't leave on the Wi-Fi. Don't leave on the Bluetooth. Don't leave on, the locator, the hotspot, the 5G. Turn it all off, because now the choice is yours. Headaches, nosebleeds, fatigue, pain from unidentified sources. Another mechanism of harm is something called rouleau formation. And in my little brain, that sounds like the candy Rolos, rouleau, Rolos. And that's how I remember it, because remember Rolos, that stack of caramel chocolates? Well, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our systems and organs. What Dr. McDehavis and others have identified, when you look under a microscope of regular blood cells, they're these beautiful ovals floating around, doing their thing. When you expose them to man-made electromagnetic fields, what happens? Well, first they start getting disshaped or misshapen. They start looking like bottle caps. And then because it's an electromagnetic field, they start glomming together. And then you've got this chain of red blood cells that can't get to where they need to go to oxygenate all of your vital organs. So we know about that rouleau effect. And then skin. Some people will talk about, oh yeah, my gosh, I get this hot ear, or my face or my skin starts to flush, or I get rashes or burning sensations, or I get this tingling. So the gentleman who was gracious enough to design our logo for Massachusetts for Safe Technology lives in the town over from me in Framingham. And he fell down the rabbit hole when his legs started going jiggity with the nerves, and his doctors couldn't figure it out. So Chuck started doing his research, and he figured out microwave radiation. And where did Chuck store his cell phone all day? Right in that pocket on the leg that was going jiggity. So Chuck figured it out. So you can make great inroads once you simply know to connect the dots. And it doesn't cost you anything to turn this stuff off. So why not try it? Heart irregularities. People talk about high or low blood pressure. They talk about irregular heartbeats. They talk about feeling like somebody's sitting on their chest, arrhythmias, tachycardia. So our big, beautiful organs are not meant to be overpowered with this man-made radiation. And then cognitive impairment. Oh my gosh. People, when I was younger, I'd open the fridge and go, what did I come in here for? But that was just a blip. Now we have serious cognitive impairment in people of all ages. And now we are seeing these societal outbursts. And I will tell you that the EMF medical conferences, it scared the bejesus out of me when doctors were saying, if we don't get ahead of this, we are changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain. We are changing the structures of the brain. And it's hitting in the areas where executive function and other really important things live that cause us to create good decision-making. So they said, if we don't get ahead of this, we can expect many more of these societal outbursts that we've been hearing reported in the news. And subsequent to that, when the kids went back to school here in Boston after the pandemic, after they had been issued Chromebooks or tablets to access their education with not one shred of safety instruction, on 3 different news reports in 3 different school districts, they were reporting that the children were out of control and had begun to beat their classmates or their teachers with the Chromebook because they were so angry and could no longer modulate their behavior on 3 different news reports. And I was at my gym one day and I got to chatting with a woman who's a teacher at a local school in Framingham. And she says, oh my gosh, we have a colleague out on disability right now because a kid beat her up with his Chromebook. So it's happening, folks. We can't keep waiting for higher authorities to tell us what to do. We're smart enough to look at the science, to look at the solutions, to put it together and take meaningful action this school year, because it's only going to get worse if we don't. We were already at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression before we got locked down in a pandemic. We were already getting radiated at these excessive levels. And we are seeing suicidal ideation among adults and children like we have never, ever seen before. There is a group of world scientists at the International Commission for the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. And just recently, they put out this incredible statement on electromagnetic hypersensitivity crisis. So please, use this resource, listen to our world-leading scientists, and start sharing this information. Okay. One of my biggest questions is, if this is as bad as the science is telling us, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. So why don't we know? And then I fell down the rabbit hole in 2012. My schools became the first in the nation in 2014 to even have our little sign hanging in our classrooms. And then in 2015, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics put out this fantastic report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And if you note the graphic that they put on their captured agency report, it's a revolving door. And that's what most of our federal agencies have become, is sock puppets for the industries. They get the laws passed that benefit their bottom line and their agenda, not protecting public health. So that was my missing puzzle piece. And that was the day that I went, oh man, so there is nobody coming from up above to rescue us. So that's why we do what we do. And we provide the information that you won't find in mainstream media. ProPublica came out with another really good article a year or two about this. And remember that $30 million study that our government commissioned with the National Toxicology Program that found clear evidence of cancers and DNA damage? That was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration 2 decades ago. The gentleman who at this point in time was in charge of the Food and Drug Administration's radiological control area was this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. Well, he takes that study and says to the FCC, we don't really believe that. Let's just keep doing what we're doing. One might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, somebody went and looked into his background, and we discovered that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents big everybody, big Wi-Fi, big Agra, big food, big pharma. So we have conflicts of interest all up and down the chain. And I just got word from the Soft Lights Foundation, which is trying to protect people from those blinding headlights that they've weaseled their way into. I just found out from them that Dr. Jeffrey Shuren has just resigned. So he's retiring. So we'll see who comes in after him. But our federal agencies, it's going to be a long time before we see anything meaningful there. And sadly, this goes all the way up to the World Health Organization. So I mentioned that back in 2011, they classified this radiofrequency radiation as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. In 2011, what was missing were the animal studies, like we now have today from the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute. So they have reopened their investigation to account for not only the cancers, but the infertility, the impact on the environment, on children, on the elderly, on people with electromagnetic sensitivities. And they reopened that investigation, and we need to know that there's 2 groups at the WHO. One is the highly qualified scientists and doctors whose life's work is investigating man-made radiation, and the other is self-appointed by industry. And guess who's got their hooks into this new investigation with the WHO? They keep throwing out garbage paper after garbage paper, trying to make it look like this is fine. But for every garbage paper they put out, our scientists and doctors are putting out the counter argument so that we can keep the true facts ahead of us. So again, folks, no cavalry coming. So we've talked about our own exposures, our own devices, but we need to know that there are other exposures that are directly impacting us in our homes and our children's schools. Cell towers used to be out in industrial parks 300 feet up in the air. But as industry started rolling out more and more product, they need more capacity for all those new connections, for all the new products that they're putting out there. So then they started encroaching closer and closer and closer, and interpreted that Telecom Act of 1996 to hide behind, hey, if we can paint it the same color as what we're mounting it on, like a building rooftop or the sides of the building, then aesthetically, we can do this. So they approach property owners and say, hey, you'll get a revenue stream if you let us just put these on your roof or mount them on the side of the building. And what do you think's happening to the poor people inside those buildings? Or with 5G and the Internet of Things, they're putting small cells directly in people's front and backyards. We'll talk about that in a second. So when we look at the science on cell towers, it's critical that we examine the non-industry funded science. And being a tech writer and getting in way over my head on this issue, where I couldn't remember where I saw credible resources I wanted to revisit or share with others, I just created a very simple research repository that I called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So no bells or whistles, just straight listings of resources that I think are worth sharing. And then in my navigation over here, you can look at the science, you can look at all the military studies, because our governments have known for decades, since the 50s, that this is extraordinarily harmful. And you can now go read those declassified military studies. So I've got it broken down and sliced into many different areas here. Every one of these links are listed at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resources page. So you don't have to remember how to get to my research repository. It's all out on my website. But here's what they have found in the epidemiological studies. And I had to go look up that word too. That means scientists look at what's happening out in society. Those are the epidemiological studies. And so they did the investigation and found that if you have a cell tower nearby, there is a neurotoxicity and death curve within 1,640 feet, which is 500 meters. That death and neurotoxicity curve starts to come down at 1,640 feet or 500 meters. It doesn't actually catch up with the general population until almost double that at 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. So nobody should have these things at close range. The science is suggesting that you be at least a quarter mile from residential and other sensitive areas like schools and hospitals and parks and playing fields. And where you have sensitive populations like children, pregnant people, people with health conditions, at least a half a mile. And you can go in America to antennasearch.com and put your address in, and it will return a 3-mile radius of all the cell towers, and then all the total antennas that are mounted on whatever, be it a cell tower, a building, or a water tower. They started targeting our water tanks, church steeples, because they need things that are high up to blast the signal far and wide. So go to antennasearch.com and just get a reality check for yourself. This diagram or map down here is just one neighborhood in Boston, and look at how electropolluted they are with these big antennas. So those are called macro cell antennas. And then they added this new layer of electropollution with 5G. They're not getting rid of the signals. Remember, you need those big, long signals to get into our buildings from 3G and 4G. And all that's left are these dinky little millimeter waves. Well, they're promising faster speeds, faster streaming downloads, superhighways, smart cities, and all this stuff. But in order to do it, they are using these tiny little millimeter waves that get disrupted or diffused if they hit something like rain or snow or leaves on a tree or a building or anything in its path. So 5G just means technically 5th generation technology, and our friends in Hawaii at Hawaiians for Safe Technology or Safe Tech Hawaii, they have a really good little short video here, 5 or 6 minutes, on what 5G is and isn't. But they're spinning it up as all this great new tech. But if you look at who's benefiting from this, it's a new revenue stream. These same parent companies that own big tech are buying up the entertainment industry to push their streaming services. So it just goes on, folks. But here's what some of the 5G antennas look like, these little tiny canisters. But it doesn't fly by itself, so it's a whole new layer on top of all the other bad stuff we already had. And their goal, in order for 5G to fly, it can't go very far because it's got to be right wherever your 5G devices are. So they want to put millions of these, every 2 to 12 houses, inside our neighborhoods in our public access way. That's what 5G is. And they are targeting our schools, and they're using fear-mongering to say, hey, if there's a shooter in your building, you're going to want that cell tower on your school because otherwise you're not going to be able to reach your kids. Well, that's just ridiculous. If you have a shooter in the building, the last thing you want is a kid on a cell phone talking so the shooter can hear where those kids are. You want that child paying attention to the adults in the environment and following directions to keep those kids safe. Once the crisis is under control, they will unlock those cell phones and absolutely give them to the children so they can contact their parents. One of the things that we've seen in other shooting environments is that all this disinformation starts getting out because the kids are on their phones, they don't have the facts yet, and then the school has to take precious resources to then go back and backtrack and clean up all the disinformation. So I get it. I'm a parent. I want to know my kids are safe. But we've got to do it in a sane way. And putting an environmental pollutant on your schools is not the way to go. So we need to get educated, and we need to get educated quickly, and we need to stand up as parents and get those taken down. That's the only thing that's going to break those contracts. And they're clear-cutting trees to get these in at a time when our communities, especially our cities, are fighting climate change and saying we need tree canopies to naturally cool our cities in the hot months. And industry just comes in and lops off those trees to get their signals. So we're going to teach you the solutions, but U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal up in D.C. was at a Commerce Committee hearing, and he said to 2 industry leaders, so please share with us, how much funding did you put forth for independent testing to prove that this was safe before you brought 5G to market? And these 2 industry guys just kind of hominid, and ultimately were meant to say, well, gee, we don't actually know of any studies that were done. So Blumenthal said, so basically, as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And that's what they do. Throw it in now, ask questions later. And, you know, the people who report on this in the tech industry are saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us anything faster than what 4G already delivered. So it's just another revenue stream for industry, and a marketing term at that. Okay, folks, that's all the bad news. Now let's kick into high gear with the good news. We know how to fix this. Here's what you can do with the technology that you have personal control over. Let's get to what the CDC recommends for radiation, as low as reasonably achievable. That's the ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. So now instead of all Wi-Fi all the time, let's switch the mindset and see what can we do with as little radiation and still have amazing connections. So let's stay connected and protected. Look at the back of your router. You'll find Ethernet ports. Run a big long Ethernet cable to the place or places in your home where you use your technology the most. And electricians know how to put Ethernet jacks in your walls. It's not rocket science to fix. And you may already have them and just forgot about them when you got talked into putting all this wireless stuff in your house. So run a big long Ethernet cable to wherever you use your technology. Most of us have multiple devices now. You can get something called an Ethernet switch, which you can think of as an extension box for Tektronix here. And then get individual cables for Ethernet from the switch. You probably need to buy an adapter if your device doesn't still have an Ethernet port directly in it, and then plug it into your device, right? So the first step is to just hardwire. I lucked out. I still had a box of Ethernet cables in my basement in the utility closet, so I just started plugging stuff back in. I did buy the Ethernet switch, and I have that in my living room. And my daughter, when she's working from home, she's got one down in the home office here that she uses. $20. You can plug 4 different things in. One is your router and then 4 devices. You can get these in any size. For a classroom, you can get one that has 30. In the ceiling on all of those wireless access points, go up and take a look. There's 2 Ethernet ports. Just drop an Ethernet cable down, get a switch, configure your classroom so that you have, centralized technology and you're not tripping on wires, and then just plug everybody in and only use technology for what you need it for, not as the go-to, because we know now scientifically it's a huge distraction. It is not producing the educational outcomes that we were sold on. And bravo to all the schools like Los Angeles Unified School District, where Brenda is, where they are putting the cell phone ban in effect in this school year. And so the first step is to hardwire. Step 2 is to go into every device and turn off the antennas. And I didn't know how to do that with my router, so I contacted my internet service provider. And they said, that's easy, sit down at your computer. And I went, really? And they said, yeah, we're going to walk you through into your account online. And I said, cool. So they did, and they took me into the page for wireless settings, and I had a 2.4 gigahertz antenna. I had a 5 gigahertz antenna. I had a 2.4 gigahertz hotspot, and I had a 5 gigahertz hotspot. And I learned later that industry was putting those hotspots on my router to throw signal out to their customers driving by using my electricity. How mixed up is that? So I learned how to turn off all those antennas. And first I had Verizon, and then my husband found a better deal with Comcast Xfinity. So we switched, and my husband said, my wife's going to want to make sure that when you hook up all those boxes in our house, there's going to be no radiation. He said, no problem. Well, big problem. They came, I measured, it was still in the red zone. I said, you turned off those 2 regular antennas, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, you turned off those 2 hotspots, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, so why is it still off the charts with my radiation detection meter? And they said, I don't know. Their tech support didn't know. He called his manager. They didn't know. And so he said, I'm coming back tomorrow with my supervisor. And I said, okay. Well, that night, my husband went out and bought us our own router because I didn't want to play this game. If they don't know why that thing's radiating, I don't want their device in my house. And in the meantime, I called my friend Peter Sullivan in Silicon Valley because I remembered him saying there was an additional antenna. And he filled me in and said, it's very likely for the home security system. And I wasn't even using a wireless home security system, but they give us all of our devices blasting full tilt. So when they came back the next day, I told the supervisor and the technician what I had figured out. And they thanked me for teaching them what this was. And I learned that you have to call tech support and say, I need a tier 2 tech support person, which gets you to an engineer. And from their end, they can then disable that home security antenna. And I'm like, homie, don't want to play that game. I just don't even want to play. So I said, we bought our own router as a show of good faith. Would you please just hook it up for me? And they did. They were very nice about that. So the first step is hardwire. The second step is to turn off the radiating antennas in your settings. And you darn well better measure, because they have many antennas in all these devices. And sometimes the thing that glows on your device doesn't actually show all the antennas in there if that glow thing isn't glowing like my printer. So you really need to measure. Get one for your library, get one for yourself, get your friends and loved ones to go in on one, but get one, because seeing is believing. And until you measure, they want to have 200 wireless devices in our homes for the Internet of Things. So you really, really have to look. And here's what it looks like. It's not rocket science. You use an adapter, you plug into a switch, and then at techsafeschools.org, we've got some technical information for your IT folks. Again, industry gives us everything out of the box, full tilt, blasting to cover thousands of connections when you might only have 26 devices in your classroom. Why are we doing this to ourselves? They can reduce the power by 90+%, still get a connection, and lower that radiation exponentially. So we know how to do this, folks. Don't be scared. Do these free things that cost you nothing to turn down the power, but a couple of clicks of the mouse. So Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when we have meaningful change in our society, it comes through 3 channels. 1, the public figures out what's going on and uses their voice. No cavalry coming, guys. It's you and I. 2nd, the courts rule. And 3rd, public policy finally gets forced to catch up. So we've got great inroads in all of these. I'm going to skim through some. I will send you my slides so you can do the deeper dive. And in other talks that I give, I go into more detail on these. But please know there are lawsuits happening all over the country. And Brenda has been involved in Los Angeles. The Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense won that lawsuit where the courts ruled the FCC was arbitrary and capricious. And I had to go look that up, which meant they made it up. They just stuck with these 1996 public radiation exposure limits without even looking at the public record. So it takes a couple more years to get that thing at the courts to do something. So we can't wait. We are frying our kids in our schools and our homes today. But other good inroads, the Massachusetts Board of Health has legal guidelines that talk about cell phones or in cell towers. They're waiting to see what happens with this lawsuit in Massachusetts, where their Board of Health determined this cell tower caused these families to be so sick they had to abandon. And the ones who couldn't afford to go anywhere else and stayed, another one just died. And when they opened him up, he had cancer all throughout his body. People were having headaches, nausea, dizziness, anxiety. The kids were vomiting in their beds. The dogs were, all the bees and the pollinators are gone. So we are hoping that this lawsuit will come forward and reestablish that that Board of Health has jurisdiction to force Verizon to move that cell tower. This can be game-changing, but again, we can't wait. Other lawsuits all over. Here at this school in Massachusetts, for the first time in the United States, the courts recognize that you do not have to have heat to have harm, and heat is what the FCC stands behind. They recognize that there are biological effects at the non-thermal level. So many lawsuits happening, but we'll let you look at that on your own. And then this is that experience we had with Rep. Patrick Abrami in New Hampshire. Groundbreaking report that was by law obligated to answer, why does the insurance industry exclude coverage for this radiation? Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best put exclusions in their policies so our towns and schools can be left holding the bag on legal liability. Why do we even have that fine print that we talked about at the beginning? Why is the FCC ignoring the studies? And why aren't they looking at these non-thermal effects? And why do we allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? Well, the answer is that we have industry here running our government. And why is the cumulative effect, all of our cell phones, all of our routers, all of our baby monitors, all of our gaming systems, all of these small cell antennas, nobody's looking at the cumulative effects. So bless New Hampshire, they investigated with world-leading experts, doctors, scientists, public policy leaders, and came up with this report that is free and available online. It's in my signature. You can get it in my slides, recommending and acknowledging these conflicts of interest with our federal agencies and a lot of our state agencies and a lot of our municipal agencies. 15 recommendations that you can go through, but one of them is we've got to transition away from wireless for primary connectivity, and especially in our schools and especially with children and other vulnerable populations. So you can watch a 20-minute presentation with Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire. He has been a lifetime developer of medical devices that use this radiation. So we know it can be used in a controlled medical setting to do amazing things. He thought this would be a slam dunk. Of course, Wi-Fi must be fine, until he got in and investigated in the highly credible peer-reviewed science. Now he's out in our world, he's retired, but he has taken on with many of these leading organizations to come up with solutions on safe technology. So for our schools, you can look. I went and measured in our beautiful new elementary school. Industry convinced them that they need a wireless access point in every classroom, when in reality, they don't even allow kids to have wireless devices in the school, no cell phones, and they have limited use of tablets. And these are pulsating microwaves all the time. So I went in during the open house and I took real measurements without the kids even being there, without people's devices being on. I was the only one in these classrooms and hallways taking this measurement just of what's in the air. Can you imagine what it is when everybody's in there? And you will be horrified at what we find. New York Times executives, what are they doing? Silicon Valley executives, the New York Times reported, Silicon Valley executives are banning screens from their children, and they are making their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children while they peddle it to our kids. So excellent, excellent inroads. We know how to do this safely. Other countries are taking tech out because we're not getting the educational outcomes. Skip the iPads, skip the Chromebooks, and get back to teaching, because children need meaningful interaction with meaningful adults. They need to interact with their peers. They need to have movement, and they need to be out in nature. They do not need to be in the shallows of a screen. And Dr. Holly Grow is a corneal surgeon down in Louisiana, and she got a whole bunch of doctors and other specialties together and unanimously got a law passed to start taking charge of technology in schools, getting kids back outside, limiting the use. So great resources here. The first public health agency at a state level has put out a fact sheet that recommends hardwiring in schools. So folks, the work has been done. Here in the pandemic, Cyprus put out recommendations for studying at home. Hardwire your technology, shut the antennas off, limit the amount of time for every age group. We know how to do it. And Brenda, if you want to unmute a second and talk us through this wonderful effort that you've spearheaded in Los Angeles, I think it will inspire others.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Great presentation. It's so thorough. Well, we at Fiber First LA, I've been working with them for over 2 years, and we've been supporting different issues, legislations, lobbying, educating our elected officials at many levels. And this time we decided to write a letter and send it to the board members at the LAUSD school district. And we're basically asking them to look a little deeper beyond just the cell towers, to pay a little more attention to the fact that there's a lot of radiation emitting in these classrooms, and to pay attention to that. The one of the board members, uh, that is his name is Malvonic, from LAUSD. He's the one who pushed for the amendments to the legislation, well, to the policy. Um, in his district, he started what is called a phone-free school. So they just isolated these phones. They just put them in a different room. Some of them just keep the kids allow the kids to keep their phones, but in a special pocket on airplane mode, in a special safety pocket that stops the emission of the radiation, and a special lock that gets only opened by either principal or vice principal. And the kids are still allowed to keep their phones with them. But they noticed that the kids were happier, they were playing, the bullying went down, the test scores went up. And this is only by isolating, or in this case, I'm sorry, only by banning the cell phones. So what we in Fiber First LA, with a letter, working with many groups, including Cece, who's been extremely helpful, Grassroots, Doug and Patty, and Fiber First LA, 5G Free California, Sydney, and we all come together to put our brains together and got this letter out. And so, requesting, if we take it to the next level, if we already know that this is working with keeping the phones away from the kids, and we take it to the next level and we keep the radiation off, the schools are, LAUSD, it is one of the biggest school districts, but it's also one of the school districts that has not, they move forward with the Wi-Fi immediately, but their schools are very old. The schools are still have the wires from the 90s.
Mhm.
So, it's not that difficult. It is
Right.
not that difficult. And they do have plenty of budget allocated for their IT. So they also had one of the major breaches of information in the nation, just like a couple of years ago, where even the FBI got involved because they were being blackmailed. And that's
Oh,
because all their system was on Wi-Fi. And now they are switching to fiber optics. They're looking into fiber optics, but only for their offices. So why can't we take it to the next level with fiber optics, removing the Wi-Fi? Just something as simple as you mentioned, Cece, you know, kids back then, couple of, decades ago, they used to have computer labs. You used to have one room specifically for that. And
yeah.
then you go about your business on learning all these different things, exercising, going to your PE class, going to, there's a community garden in your school, et cetera, like exposing the kids to all these different other ways of learning.
Yeah.
Why can't we just do that? You know,
Yeah.
it
Well,
was
I
it
think
was being effective.
the pendulum swung way out there when we got sold on all Wi-Fi all the time, all tech all the time. And now we realize it's harming our children in many, many different ways. And so the pendulum's coming back to the center. So Brenda, thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And Sydney too, you've been a tireless advocate in California as well. But let's look real quick at solutions now. So the U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools is one of these organizations that certifies green schools, and Dr. Tony Stein worked with them to get a module on low EMF best practices. Take a look at that for your schools. As Brenda mentioned, Doug and Patty Wood with Grassroots Environmental Education have put up this whole program just for our schools and parents, and it's called Tech Safe Schools. They've got good information on the science, on the risks to both health and legal risks for our schools. And then most importantly, how do we mitigate and get to safe tech schools? And I love the way Patty and Doug do things because they're always very friendly and no fear mongering. We just want to get this done. Now, look at their toolkit. They will actually, if you contact them, they have a packet of information that they will send on your behalf to your school administrators to allow you to open the conversation with them as well. My word of caution is don't do that yet. get other parents, grandparents, guardians around you or caring community members, get a good core of adults and even mature students who want to get involved with this. Do that first. Get everybody educated first, and then go to your schools so that they see it's a serious issue and you can then empower your schools to take action. And we're going to teach you the resources you can use to do that kind of local education. Professional develop, so K through 12 curriculum has already been developed by the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition in conjunction with the Environmental Health Trust and other experts. They have prevention curriculum for cell towers or wireless. It's all there. And then Dr. Alexia McKnight and I did 4 trainings during Teacher Professional Development Day at her kids' schools down in Pennsylvania. Here's one of them. It's 46 minutes long, but we would love to bring PD to your school. So please reach out. And then here's the course that we have, off-the-shelf training. We could customize it if you need us to do anything a little differently, but we have off-the-shelf training that can be done with your entire school in about an hour. And it comes with a certificate of completion. So if you have to track your training for compliance, you get that. And it also kicks out a tip sheet at the end with handy reminders. And then our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have so many resources you can use. All of our schools, the colleges and the dorms, the kids there might do it just if you tell them that wireless consumes 10 times more energy than hardwired connections. So people might come at this from different ways. And here's another post on the virtual reality goggles. Who in their right mind, once they know, would ever let a child put a cell phone up to their brain to do virtual reality? So lots to learn, and that's our first step. So for our school doctors and nurses and counselors, we have amazing resources for you today. A free medical conference. You can slot these things into your calendar and watch 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour, and learn from world-leading doctors and scientists. Same thing for all the other professions. We have got you covered. Please take the time to learn. So next steps, continue learning, all right? I'm going to be partnering with Patty and perhaps Doug Wood in the month of September. We're coming up with some dates that we'll announce next week. I will also be interviewing Patty and maybe Doug for my little cable show, Tech Safe here. So keep learning. I just read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. This is what really catalyzed schools saying, okay, we are getting the smartphones out. He identified in like 2012 when we started giving our kids smartphones, we started opening up Pandora's box. Reset Your Child's Brain, Dr. Victoria Dunkley already has a 4-week product protocol to wean your kids and yourself off of being in front of your screens all the time. And as terrifying as it sounds to make that break, these families find that after these 4 weeks, oh my gosh, it's night and day. They've got their beautiful children back. All these outbursts and stuff have just, so we know how to do this, folks. Who knew? There's 2 episodes on PBS on this you can watch. And here's this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. It's carried by most of our library streaming services right now, and you can get it on all the other popular streaming services, except here in America, Amazon Prime just censored it. But a little bit of my work with Ashland Public Schools is featured in there, and you'll hear from world-leading scientists and doctors, and it's not fear-mongering. It's teaching and it's common sense. And then this, I welcome anybody to just look at and print copies and keep them with you. People are telling me around me that they do this, and it's just a little 4-page thing over here. And the last page has a document graphic that shows where all these exposures are hitting the body. They're telling me that this is really good because it's quick and easy to look at. Well, here's what I thought I knew, and then here's the real facts about it. So EMF points of confusion versus fact. And then feel free to just consume these half-hour episodes at my cable show. And I want folks to think about this. We are going to pilot 10 communities, and it's going to be me and Brenda and Sydney and a number of others that are signing up with us, but I still have room for more. We want to get this community education out first. We will develop flyers that you can physically hand out at the soccer game, at the open houses, wherever the families are gathering. Get this into the hands of the families. And then we will conduct community forums, either in person or via Zoom, where everyone can come together and start this conversation. And then as a community, we go to conduct school outreach. For my 10 pilots, I've been so grateful to Rob Metzinger, who owns the company, Safe Living Technologies, that makes this meter. And I've gotten a small grant, and he's cut me a deal where I will provide a Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter to you and your community, with the expectation that you will donate it to your schools if we succeed, or to your library so everybody can borrow it. But you can use it while we're doing the program, and then we want it to be in the community if they can't afford to get it on their own. If they can, you can keep the meter. And most importantly, never go this alone. That was my hard lesson learned. You're going to be swept under the rug because everyone is so overburdened already. Do not go it alone. Let's build out our support system first locally. And then we, as a team of 10 communities, we will hold regular strategy meetings, see what's working, see what's not, what we can do to support one another. And it's go time. Let's get it done and protect our kids. And then let's celebrate all of our milestones, because it takes a whole lot of courage to do this work. We all come out of our comfort zones, but we also think our kids are worth it and you're worth it. So let's be the catalyst that helps to empower industry to compete on safety. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you for giving us 2 hours out of your precious days. And I realize I've gone over a little bit. Is there anything pressing in the chat, Sydney or Brenda, that we should answer right now?
We have a question from Shannon saying, when is the pilot program going to start?
This fall. So if you're interested, please email me at massachusettsforsafetechnology@gmail.com. I hope to start gathering everyone together in September and getting active in our communities in October, because we live here in New England and it's going to start snowing soon. So we want to get those early, get out to the community and hand out flyer things done before we have really bad weather. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We will send out my slides. We will send out our presentation. And I'm so grateful to our co-hosts this month, Brenda and Sydney. And please use our resources, but do your deep dive. We don't want you to take our word on any of this. Know it for yourselves, and then let's get busy. All right, everybody. Have a tech-safe day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.